you're going to get even with some people.
Given the opportunity, I will get even with some people that were disloyal to me.
So Trump was elected by less than half the voters, okay? But does that really matter? I mean, it's like falling off a 20-story building as opposed to a 50-story building. Pretty much the same result, and none of it's good. That said, Trump's appointees look like a collection of carnival workers on meth from this whack job.
And they're reporting that doctors, in a deposition, that RFK said doctors found a worm in his brain that had eaten part of his brain and then died.
To this slightly better looking version of Harvey Weinstein.
In a 2018 email to her son obtained by the New York Times, Penelope Hegseth wrote, "On behalf of all the women, and I know it's many, you have abused in some way, I say get some help and take an honest look at yourself."
Well, calling it a shit show would be an understatement.
Young man, there's no need to feel down. I said, young man.
Now, as you know, or should anyway, the Constitution gives the power of advise and consent to the Senate. Now, even though that's a pretty weak-sounding concept, advise and consent. I mean, I would have gone with, I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to fucking do it. But we'll stick with advise and consent. So, the U.S. Senate gets an up and down vote on Trump's insanity. But it's Trump. And of course, he's got other plans.
President-elect Trump says he wants the next Senate Republican leader, the majority leader, to allow what we've discussed earlier called recess appointments. This would allow the White House to temporarily bypass confirmation votes for high-level appointments when the Senate is out of session. And in a post on social media, Trump said, quote, "Sometimes the votes can take 2 years or more. This is what they did 4 years ago, and we cannot let it happen again. We need positions filled immediately." Help us step back, Tom. Recess appointments, the history of them on a legal and political level.
Oh, boy. Well, recess appointment power is enshrined in our Constitution. Typically, the Constitution requires that the United States Senate confirm high-level federal officials, cabinet officials, federal judges, and the like. But it also says that when the Senate is in recess, basically when the senators are not in session, when they've all dispersed to their home states, the president can appoint officials through a recess appointment, which does not require Senate confirmation. So historically, this has been something that presidents will use typically when they suspect that the Senate will not confirm the nominee they'd like to put in the job. So they wait until the senators go out of town and bam.
Well, now, how bad are these nominees? Well, Republicans have a 6-vote advantage in the Senate, 53 to 47. So this should be a slam dunk, right? But these humps are such freaks, even the spineless core of MAGA can't get on board. First, it was Gates for Attorney General, which is like putting P. Diddy in charge of the office Christmas party. Rapey McForehead's exit from consideration signaled that Trump did not take into account the occasional Republican with a sliver of spine. Picking Gates was insane, but no more than Kennedy, who, in addition to his dangerous ideas on science,
the capacity for these chemicals that we are just raining down on our children right now to induce these very profound sexual changes in them.
Well, Bobby, like Gates, was a little too touchy-feely as well.
She was a babysitter for him in 1999, 1998. And he made some advances on her, unwanted advances on her, groped her, she says.
But Kennedy's clueless comments about the success of vaccines saving lives and his belief that fluoride will make your kid gay, well, that should give anyone pause about putting this hump in charge of Health and Human Services, right?
Well, the legal concern would simply be that the president would use this as an opportunity to bypass the normal constitutional process for confirming officials. In other words, the founders wanted to ensure that there was a senatorial check on high-level appointments, that the United States senators would evaluate the qualifications of nominees and only approve those who are deemed worthy. A recess appointment enables a president to circumvent that process. So that would be the concern, that if a president were to use this power indiscriminately, in other words, not for legitimate reasons, such as because they actually need someone to fill this spot during a time of, a national security crisis, for example, but simply because they wanted to circumvent the Senate's approval process, that would be a legal concern.
So do you see my point? While the Senate for now may push back, Trump has other plans to circumvent the Senate and the Constitution. As you heard, it's called a recess appointment. But what it really is, it's like when your parents go away for the weekend and you're in charge of the liquor cabinet.
Holly was a teenage binge drinker. On this night, she's barreling down the highway after a few too many drinks.
What are your expectations about how this process will actually play out?
Well, thanks, Kelly. I think with all due deference to the senator, I do think that over time what's happened now is that we have more than 1,000 political appointees that require Senate confirmation. And it means that the process is really dragged out and there's no real way that the Senate gets to know all those nominees. So I think there's some sympathy for the notion of we need to expedite this process. But I think when the president goes about it this way, it's actually counterproductive to his cause, because when you're nominating somebody who's an alleged sex trafficker to be the top law enforcement officer in the land, or somebody who's praising Edward Snowden and Julian Assange for leaking national intelligence that jeopardizes the lives of Americans in the battlefield to run our intelligence agencies, it doesn't create sympathy for the Senate to want to go into recess in the first place to allow any sort of recess appointment. And as you said, if they force a court issue, I think there's several conservative judges from Thomas and Alito and Roberts who are on the record when Obama tried to recess appointments in his administration who have shown a lot of doubt about the executive branch's ability to do that. And so I think this is part of the natural check and balances that our founders created that the Senate requires us advise and consent.
Now that guy, he's not some crazy liberal. That would be me. He was Pence's chief of staff. What Donnie Diapers wants to do is expedite a process that admittedly needs to move quickly. I mean, there are thousands of appointments like senior deputy that need filling, but Trump's nominees are coming from people like Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and this guy.
Young man, there's no need to feel down.
And Trump wants to shove them in position to do what?
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
Well, that's the frightening aspect of this. Bannon wants to arrest Biden and free the January 6 cockwaffles and send them into the streets to arrest Democrats.
And all I can say is strap in.
And Kash Patel is his guy. I mean, I wouldn't let this mope change my oil, much less put him in command of the one agency that's protected us from terror attacks since 9/11.
I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops.
We're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
Oh yeah, there's that too. None of these guys have read the Constitution or care what it says. Like Tulsi Gabbard, who's a frequent purveyor of Russian media and praises both Putin and other dictators like Erdogan. Trump wants her in charge of all of our intelligence agencies. That's like spreading a bag of dog food across the floor and giving your dog the discretion of when to stop.
Tulsi Gabbard, what are your thoughts this morning?
Well, I thought it was the worst cabinet level appointment in history until they then heard about the Matt Gaetz appointment.
That guy could eat Trump for breakfast, and for him to take the side of Democrats and sounding the alarm on Gabbard shows you the seriousness of this pick in particular. But, and here's the real question, does Trump really want this insanity, or is this some Machiavellian Trump move to distract and gain control?
Is all these choices, are they all serious? Is this really what Trump wants to do, or is some of this just a sort of shock and awe?
100%. Well, of course, Aaron, those things aren't mutually exclusive, but absolutely, based on my reporting at Mar-a-Lago, these are 100% things that President-elect Trump wants to do.
Oh, and one more thing. If Congress doesn't recess, the Constitution says a president may adjourn the House and the Senate if they're arguing over the time to adjourn. So if one chamber says yes to a resolution to adjourn and the other votes it down, Trump could theoretically weigh in and declare Congress in recess. But that's not what the framers intended, as if that matters anymore. But for all the picks for cabinet appointments, Gaetz, Kennedy, Gabbard, Hegseth, nominating Linda McMahon for Secretary of Education might be the most symbolic of how f***ed up Trump and his posse ignoramuses truly are. Remember Betsy DeVos, Trump's previous Secretary of Education, whose kids, as well as her and her husband, never attended a public school? Well, she was just the beginning of Trump's view of government, and especially science and education. So the two questions I have are, what will happen now, and what will happen later? When Trump shuts down the Department of Education, when Tulsi Gabbard starts dating Vlad, when Kennedy bans vaccines and millions die of measles, mumps, polio, or whatever the next pandemic looks like, what happens then?
It's the end of the world as we know it.
See, as we said before, Trump was elected by less than half the voters, about 70 million people. Harris had about 1.5% less than that, meaning more than 100 million people didn't even vote at all. So to those who couldn't be bothered, I advise and consent you to kiss my ass.
Damn right. I'm as mad as hell.
This is not a normal election.
Whether the women like it or not.
Suck my fat one.
This isn't their Republican Party anymore.
Trust me.
Shut the f*** up, Dan.
Who's with me? Oh, yeah, the lie.
Indictable.
Out of sheer morbid curiosity, I'm allowing this freak show to continue.
I don't want to talk about this stuff.
Am I wrong?
Yes.
Tick-tock.
You're in a lot of trouble, Donna.
I think he's crazy.
I'm Chip Franklin.